When you are staring down the barrel of a massive teaching exam, there is this immense temptation to just memorize a mountain of terminology.
Oh, absolutely. The cramming phase.
Right, the cramming phase. You think, like, if I just cram enough buzzwords into my essay, the examiner will just have to pass me.
Yeah, that's a dangerous trap, though.
It really is. It feels a bit like trying to build a house by just, you know, buying 100 gallons of really expensive paint.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, like you can throw that paint all over the lot, but without a structural foundation and without the blueprint, you don't have a house.
You just have a colorful mess on the grass.
Exactly. A colorful mess. And for decades, honestly, that's exactly what language teaching was, just throwing vocabulary paint at a wall.
Just hoping something sticks.
Hoping something sticks. So today, we are giving you the blueprint. We are going into a deep dive on topic 6, which is written communication in the foreign language classroom.
A huge topic.
Massive.
Yeah.
But we're unpacking it so that when you, the listener, sit down to write that exam essay, your structure is absolutely bulletproof.
And, the examiners grading these papers, they can spot the difference immediately. They really can.
They know who's just bluffing.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
They know who is just regurgitating a list of verbs and who actually understands the architecture of language acquisition.
Right.
If you want to prove you understand that architecture, you cannot start your essay by talking about writing the way we used to talk about it 50 years ago.
Right, because historically, the foreign language classroom treated writing as just a mere transcript of speech, or worse, like a mechanical punishment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Writing lines on a chalkboard.
Yeah. You learned the past tense, and then you wrote 20 sentences in the past tense to prove you memorized the rule.
The focus was entirely on form. It was just a secondary skill. But modern language education has completely shifted its paradigm.
It's a totally different world now.
It is. Writing is now recognized as a vital, independent component of communicative competence.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are taking this exam, there is a name you absolutely must drop in your intro.
Oh, we'd love a good name drop for the exam. Who is it?
Del Hymes. You have to mention Del Hymes to signal that you understand this shift.
Let's actually unpack Hymes for a second, because I feel like it's easy to just write his name down without understanding the mechanism of what he actually changed.
That happens a lot, yeah.
Right. Because prior to Hymes, you had Noam Chomsky talking about linguistic competence, which was basically like, if you know the rules of grammar, you know the language.
Which Hymes fundamentally disagreed with.
Right. Hymes comes along and says, no, that's incredibly incomplete.
Hymes argued, and quite brilliantly I'd say, that knowing the grammar of a language is just not enough.
Yeah.
You can have mathematically perfect grammar and still completely fail to communicate, especially if you don't know how to use that language appropriately in different contexts.
Give me an example of that.
Well, think about it. You could walk into a bank to ask for a loan and say, give me the money now.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that wouldn't go over well.
Right. Grammatically, it's a flawless imperative sentence.
Sure.
But socially and communicatively, it's a total disaster. You need to know who you're speaking to, what the purpose of the exchange is, and what the social rules are.
And that is communicative competence.
Exactly. That's the core of it.
It's basically the difference between knowing how a steering wheel works and actually knowing how to navigate through rush hour traffic without, causing a 10-car pileup.
That is a great way to put it. And from Hymes's perspective, written communication plays an incredibly important role here.
How so?
It allows learners to participate in meaningful, real-world situations. It's not a drill anymore. It's a genuine exchange of meaning.
So if I'm sitting in that exam hall and I've just explained Hymes, how do I bridge that 1970s theory into the modern classroom?
You bring in the big guns.
The sources explicitly tie this to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, right? The CEFR.
Yes, the CEFR. It's the guiding document for language education in Europe. And it essentially took Hymes' theory and operationalized it.
Put it into practice.
Right. The CEFR explicitly recognizes written production and written interaction as essential components of language proficiency.
So it's not playing second fiddle to speaking anymore.
Not at all. It places writing on the exact same level of importance as speaking or listening.
Okay, wow.
The educational framework today demands that developing writing skills contributes to linguistic competence, sure, but also to higher level skills.
Like what kind of skills?
The ability to organize complex ideas, express nuanced opinions, and engage in actual academic communication.
Okay, so that establishes the why before you ever get to the how. But here's where I want to push back a little bit.
Go for it.
Just playing devil's advocate for the sake of the listener's exam. If communicative competence is the ultimate goal, why do we need to treat writing as this entirely separate beast?
What do you mean?
Well, spoken language is communicative, right?
Yeah.
Why does topic 6 demand we isolate the nature of written communication specifically?
I see. Because the vehicle of communication fundamentally changes the rules of engagement.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, spoken language is our default as humans. It's usually spontaneous, it's highly interactive, and it relies heavily on shared context.
Right, we're sharing a physical space.
Exactly. But written communication is defined as the process of conveying meaning through written language. And it is characterized by being much more deliberate and structured.
Because it has to be.
Right. The sources highlight 4 distinct characteristics that separate writing from speaking. If you want top marks on this exam, you need to explicitly analyze these 4.
Let's dissect them then, because I think people confuse written communication with just spoken words put on paper.
Which it absolutely is not.
Right. The first characteristic is permanence. And initially I look at that and think, well, obviously it's ink on a page.
Sure, it seems obvious.
But the cognitive weight of that permanence is huge, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Permanence is arguably the most defining feature, and it changes everything about how the language must be used.
Because spoken words just disappear.
Exactly. Spoken words vanish the second they are uttered. They exist in time. But written text exists in space.
It just sits there.
Right. It remains available for later reading, rereading, and deep analysis.
And there are no immediate contextual cues either. Like when we are talking right now, if I say something confusing, I can see your eyebrows furrow.
I give you immediate visual feedback.
Yes. I can instantly pivot. I can use hand gestures. I can change the tone of my voice to signal sarcasm. I basically have a safety net.
Exactly. You have a constant real-time feedback loop. But the writer is completely isolated from the reader.
That's a scary thought.
It is. The reader might be reading the text 10 years from now on a different continent, in a completely different cultural context.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about it like that.
Therefore, precision becomes mandatory. You cannot rely on a shared physical environment to do the heavy lifting for your meaning.
The words themselves have to carry the entire burden of communication.
Exactly.
Which means you can't just wing it. If the words have to carry the entire burden, that naturally leads to the second characteristic, which is planning.
Right. Because the words have to be so precise, the writer needs time.
Whereas when we speak, we stumble all over the place.
We do.
Yeah.
We use filler words, we rephrase on the fly, and the listener naturally filters it out. It's perfectly acceptable in speech.
But in writing...
In writing, it's a mess. Written communication allows, and actually requires, time to generate ideas, organize information, and revise the text before it ever reaches the audience.
Speaking is like playing live jazz.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it is spontaneous. You are riffing off the other musicians. You make a mistake and you just, incorporate it into the next measure.
Right, it becomes part of the performance.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
writing is like composing a symphony.
Yeah.
You sit alone, you write a measure, you cross it out, you realize the brass section is completely overpowering the strings, so you rewrite the entire movement before anyone ever hears a single note.
It is deliberate, it is permanent, and it requires rigorous structure.
Rigorous structure, which is the perfect segue to the third characteristic, structure.
That analogy perfectly captures it. Written texts typically follow highly recognizable structures.
Like genres.
Exactly, genres. These help the reader interpret the message. If you receive a formal letter, an academic essay, or a narrative story, those genres provide a cognitive map for the reader.
So they know what to expect.
Right. As a result, writers must be able to organize their ideas logically. They have to use appropriate linguistic resources to achieve coherence.
Like the symphony having movements.
Yes, the symphony has movements, and the text has paragraphs, headings, and logical transitions. If the structure fails, the permanence we talked about just magnifies the confusion.
Because the confusion is just sitting there permanently on the page. Okay, and the final characteristic is formality. Now, formality can sound a bit stuffy. Does this just mean we shouldn't use, like, slang in our essays?
It goes much deeper than just avoiding slang.
Okay, how so?
Well, because of the permanence, the planning, and the lack of physical context, written communication generally involves a much higher degree of formality than spoken discourse.
So it's about the grammar itself.
Yes, this means writers must rely on more complex grammatical structures, things like subordinate clauses, passive voice, or cleft sentences.
Stuff we rarely use when just chatting.
Exactly. And you need a significantly wider range of vocabulary to express abstract ideas accurately. You basically have to paint the entire picture with syntax.
Paint the picture with syntax. I love that. So if I'm writing my exam, I'm defining the nature of writing through permanence, planning, structure, and formality.
Spot on.
I'm essentially telling the examiner, look, teaching writing isn't just about giving students a pencil, it's about teaching them to navigate a completely different mode of human expression.
Exactly. You're showing you understand the depth of the skill.
Okay, so if writing is this complex, deliberate symphony, we need to know what instruments are actually playing in the orchestra.
Right. What are the working parts?
Exactly. What are the actual ingredients required to write effectively? The sources highlight 4 specific components of written communication.
Yes. The 4 competencies.
Let's start with the most obvious one, but I want to know how to frame it for the exam so it doesn't just sound like a 1950s grammar lesson. Grammatical competence.
Well, grammatical competence involves the correct use of structures. We're talking verb tenses, sentence patterns, subject-verb agreement.
The basics.
Right. But in your exam, don't just say grammar is important. Connect it back to the mechanism of permanence we just talked about.
Oh, clever.
Accurate grammar contributes to clarity. It is the agreed-upon universal code that ensures the reader can decipher your meaning.
Because they are separated from you by time and space.
Exactly. If the code is broken, the message is lost in translation.
Okay, so grammar is the code. Next up is lexical competence. Basically, vocabulary.
Yes, vocabulary.
But the text notes something really interesting here. It says, a wide lexical repertoire enables learners to convey subtle meanings and avoid unnecessary repetition.
Which is a huge issue in writing.
Right. Why is repetition such a big deal?
In spoken language, we repeat the same basic verbs and adjectives all the time.
Yeah.
Like you might say, it was a good movie, really good, we had a good time.
Yeah, and no one cares.
Exactly. It vanishes into the air, so we don't notice the repetition. But in writing, because it sits there permanently on the page, repetition becomes glaringly obvious.
It gets tedious to read.
Very tedious.
Yeah.
So lexical competence isn't just about knowing long, pretentious words for the sake of it.
Right.
It's about having the precision to select the exact appropriate vocabulary. You adapt your language to the specific communicative situation.
It's the difference between writing, he walked into the room versus he stomped into the room.
Perfect example.
One gives you an action, but the other gives you the entire emotional context without needing a whole extra sentence explaining that he was angry.
Precisely. That is what we call lexical efficiency.
Okay, so we have the grammar, which is the code. We have the lexis, the precise words.
Good.
Now we need the glue holding it all together.
The third ingredient.
Right, discourse competence. And the sources specifically mention 2 words here. Coherence and cohesion.
Ah, yes.
I want to spend a minute on this because students, and honestly even seasoned teachers, constantly confuse these 2 terms. They use them interchangeably.
They do, and they really shouldn't. They are completely intertwined, yes, but they are distinct concepts.
Okay, break them down for us.
Discourse competence is the macro structure. It is how you guide the reader logically from one idea to the next. Let's separate the 2 terms.
Start with cohesion.
Think of cohesion as the literal linguistic glue on the page. It's the use of connectors, like however, furthermore, or on the other hand.
So transition words.
Yes, but also reference pronouns. Using it, or they correctly, so the reader knows exactly what noun you're referring back to. It's the visible links between sentences.
Okay, so if cohesion is the visible glue, what is coherence then?
Coherence is the logical flow of ideas. It's whether the argument actually makes sense in the reader's mind.
Give me an example of how a student might have one without the other, because I think that's where the rubber meets the road for the exam.
All right, imagine a student writes this paragraph. Listen closely.
I'm ready.
I bought a blue car. Blue is the color of the sky. Furthermore, the sky is very high up. Therefore, high up in the mountains, it snows.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's quite a paragraph.
Right, exactly. Every sentence is perfectly glued to the next using lexical repetition. You have blue, sky, high up.
Yeah, and they used furthermore and therefore.
Exactly. The cohesion is actually flawless.
But the paragraph is completely incoherent.
Yes. It means absolutely nothing. It is a logical disaster.
That is wild.
Discourse competence requires both. You need the logical progression of thought, which is coherence, and the appropriate linguistic markers that signpost that progression, which is cohesion.
That is a phenomenal distinction to make in an exam essay. The blue car to the snow. I love that.
It really illustrates the point perfectly.
Okay, here is where I want to challenge the framework a bit, though.
Sure.
The first three components, grammar, lexis, discourse, those all make total sense to me as linguistic skills.
Right.
But the fourth component, the sources list, is cognitive skills.
Mhm.
Why is cognition listed right alongside grammar?
It throws people off sometimes.
It does. Usually when we talk about language learning, we just focus on the language itself.
Right.
Why is this text insisting that writing is this dual-natured beast?
Because the linguistic elements are just the tools lying on the workbench.
Okay.
The cognitive skills are the architect wielding those tools.
Uh,
Writing requires the mental capacity to plan texts, to mentally organize information before you even write a single word.
so it's the brain work behind the scenes.
Exactly. It's the ability to critically evaluate the effectiveness of your own message and to revise it. These are high-level executive functions of the brain.
So it's not just a language exercise.
No. By emphasizing this dual nature, linguistic and cognitive,
Mm-hmm.
you show the examiner that you don't view writing as just a mechanical transcription of thought.
It's not a printer. You aren't just hitting print on your brain.
Exactly. It is a complex process of knowledge creation.
Mm-hmm.
When you write, you aren't just recording what you already know.
What are you doing then?
The act of writing actually forces you to structure and synthesize your thoughts in a way you hadn't before. It shapes the thought itself.
So if we know writing requires this massive cognitive load, like you have to manage the grammar code, the precise vocabulary, the logical coherence, the visible cohesion, and the high-level executive functioning of your brain all at the exact same time.
It's a lot.
It completely explains why students freeze when staring at a blank page. That paralysis is universal.
And that paralysis is exactly what researchers in the 1980s were trying to solve.
Which brings us to our next big milestone.
Yes. Which brings us to the most important psychological model you need to include in your exam.
Drumroll, please.
Linda Flower and John R. Hayes.
If there is one theoretical model that proves you understand the cognitive nature of writing, it's Flower and Hayes.
Absolutely essential.
So prior to their 1981 study, how was writing actually taught?
It was taught entirely as a final product.
Just the end result.
Right. The teacher assigned a topic on Friday morning. The students silently struggled through the cognitive overload you just described and handed in a finished essay on Friday afternoon.
And then what?
The teacher simply corrected the grammar mistakes in red ink. The process itself was a complete black box. No one knew what was happening in the student's head.
But Flower and Hayes changed that.
They did. They conducted what they called think aloud protocols.
Yeah.
They literally had writers talk out loud about what they were thinking as they wrote.
Oh, interesting.
And through that, they proved that writing is fundamentally a cognitive process, not just a product.
And they broke this process down into 3 specific stages. Let's walk through them, but again, I want to know why they actually matter to a teacher.
Sure.
First stage, planning.
Okay, during the planning stage, the writer is doing the heavy cognitive lifting. They are generating ideas, but more importantly, they're considering the purpose of the text.
And who they are writing for. Right.
Exactly. Identifying the intended audience. They are setting goals. For a language learner, this is crucial because it lowers the overall cognitive load.
Because they aren't multitasking as much.
Right. If you plan your ideas first, you aren't trying to invent a logical argument and remember the Spanish subjunctive tense at the exact same time.
You separate the tasks. Okay, makes sense. Second stage is drafting, which the Flower and Hayes model notably calls translating.
I love that term.
I always found that fascinating too. Why translating instead of just writing?
It is a brilliant way to describe it, especially for foreign language teachers. When you draft, you aren't just typing words.
What are you translating then?
You are translating abstract, nonverbal ideas, emotions, and goals from your brain into linear syntactic language.
You are mapping thought onto structure.
Exactly. It is a highly demanding translation process, even if you are doing it in your native language.
And then the third stage is revising.
Right. This is where the writer evaluates what they have translated against the goals they set during the planning stage.
So it's a check-in.
Yes. They make improvements in organization, upgrade the vocabulary, and fix grammatical accuracy.
But if I'm reading the source material correctly, the biggest trap a candidate can fall into on this exam is describing those 3 stages as a simple 1, 2, 3 sequence.
Oh, absolutely. That will cost you points.
The critical concept, the absolute must-include word, is recursive.
Yes. Strongly emphasize the word recursive. These stages do not happen in a fixed linear order.
It's not an assembly line.
No, it's not a car going from station A to station B to station C and rolling off the lot.
Because the human brain just doesn't work that way. It's more like sculpting clay, isn't it?
That's a great visual.
You start with a general plan, you add a piece of clay, that's your draft. You step back, you evaluate it, you smooth it out, that's revising.
Right.
But then you realize the arm looks entirely out of proportion, so you realize you need more clay. And you go all the way back to the start, redefining your entire plan as you work.
Yes, it is messy, it is cyclical, it is recursive.
You might be deep into drafting a paragraph, suddenly realize your argument isn't working at all, jump back to planning, draft a new sentence, instantly revise its grammar, and go back to planning again.
And understanding this recursive nature fundamentally changes how a teacher must behave in the classroom.
How so?
Well, if writing is a fluid, cyclical process, you cannot just grade the final product. You have to intervene and support the student during those loops.
But wait, the CEFR has recently added a whole new dimension to this.
They have.
Because everything we just discussed with Flower and Hayes sounds like a solitary act. You know, a writer alone in a room, wrestling with their own cognitive loops.
Very isolated.
But the CEFR highlights a modern concept called written interaction. How does that change the cognitive load?
It adds an entirely new layer of complexity.
Right.
Traditionally, writing was just individual production. Essays, reports, stories.
Okay.
But the CEFR acknowledges that in our modern, hyperconnected context, writing frequently serves as a medium for real-time interaction between participants.
So, like texting and emails.
Exactly. We are talking about responding to messages, participating in online forums, or negotiating meaning in a shared collaborative document.
So why is it so important to highlight written interaction in the exam?
Because when you are engaged in written interaction, that recursive process we just talked about, planning, translating, revising, has to happen almost instantly.
Oh, right, because someone is waiting for a reply.
Exactly. And you must constantly consider the perspective of the interlocutor. You have to anticipate how the reader will react to your message and adapt your language accordingly.
Often under extreme time constraints, like a ticking clock in a chat room.
Yes, it bridges the gap between the deliberate, permanent nature of traditional writing and the spontaneous, interactive nature of spoken conversation.
It requires incredibly agile communicative competence.
It really does.
Okay, let's take a breath.
It's a lot of theory.
It is. If I'm outlining my essay, I've covered the history, the nature of the beast, the 4 components, and the cognitive psychological models.
We have built a massive, rock-solid theoretical foundation.
Yes, we have. But if I am taking a teaching exam, I know that theory is only half the battle.
True.
The examiner wants to know what happens when theory meets the friction of reality. What are you actually going to do when you walk into a classroom full of 30 noisy, distracted teenagers?
You need practical application.
Exactly. Let's put boots on the ground.
This is where you transition your essay from the theory of writing to the pedagogy of writing. And the sources point to 2 primary pedagogical approaches you must discuss, which are the communicative approach and the process-oriented approach.
Let's start with the communicative approach. This is essentially the practical application of Hymes, right?
Exactly. If our theoretical goal is communicative competence, then our practical classroom activities must reflect meaningful communication.
So no more writing 20 sentences in the past tense.
No.
Yeah.
You cannot just ask students to write 10 disconnected sentences using the conditional tense. That is meaningless paint on a wall.
So what do they do instead?
The communicative approach dictates that students must write for authentic purposes and for real audiences. They need really to write beyond just the teacher needs something to grade.
Give me a real-world reason they would write in class.
Writing an email to a hypothetical hotel to book a room, or creating a brochure for their hometown. Something with a communicative goal.
I love that. And what about the process-oriented approach? Because I struggle with this one, to be honest.
A lot of teachers do.
If I have 35 kids in a room and they are all in different stages of a recursive loop, like some are planning, some drafting, some revising, isn't that just total classroom chaos?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. How does a single teacher manage a process approach without losing their mind?
Well, it sounds chaotic if you view it as unstructured free time, but a true process-oriented approach is actually highly structured.
Okay, walk me through it.
You are explicitly teaching the stages of Flower and Hayes. You don't just assign an essay on Monday and collect it on Friday.
Yeah.
You guide the entire class through the process together.
So pacing is key.
Yes. You spend Tuesday doing collaborative brainstorming and creating graphic organizers to lower the cognitive load of planning.
Everyone plans together.
Right. Then you spend Wednesday writing rough drafts in class, where you are walking around providing on-the-spot vocabulary support.
And then Thursday.
You spend Thursday doing structured peer review, teaching them how to evaluate cohesion and coherence.
So you are managing the stages, but allowing the internal recursive loops to happen within those boundaries.
Precisely. That's how you manage the chaos.
And the sources also explicitly state a rule that I think is easily overlooked in exam answers: the integration of skills.
Oh yes, very important.
Writing shouldn't happen in a vacuum.
Never. Modern language pedagogy demands that writing be integrated with reading, listening, and speaking.
To create a holistic experience.
Exactly. It mimics how we actually use language in the real world.
Give me a concrete example of what that integration actually looks like in a lesson plan, because examiners love concrete examples.
Okay, imagine a unit on environmental issues. You don't just walk in and say, write an essay about pollution.
Right, that's too isolated.
First, the students read an article about a local water crisis. Then, they listen to a podcast interview with a local activist.
So reading and listening are covered.
Yes. Then, they participate in a spoken debate about who is responsible.
There's the speaking skill.
Exactly. And finally, they synthesize all that vocabulary, all those arguments, and all those perspectives into an argumentative written text.
Oh, wow.
Writing becomes the ultimate consolidator of the other three skills. It forces students to process what they've heard and read and lock it in through the deliberate structural permanence of writing.
I love that. Okay, but I'm going to challenge you again.
Bring it on.
I'm writing my exam essay. I've explained the communicative approach, the process approach, and the integration of skills. But I need concrete past examples.
Okay.
If an examiner is reading my paper, they are waiting for me to prove I know how to design specific activities. Break down the types of writing tasks from the force, but explain the cognitive and linguistic load of each one.
Let's do it.
First, narrative writing.
Narrative writing is essentially telling a story, describing personal experiences or constructing imaginary events.
What's the load like for the student?
Cognitively, it is often the most accessible for learners.
Yeah.
Because the human brain is hardwired for chronological storytelling. We think in narratives.
And linguistically?
Linguistically, narratives force students to master specific discourse markers. Words like first, then, suddenly, in the end. And they have to utilize past tenses dynamically.
You are teaching them how to organize time on a page.
Perfectly said.
Okay, second type, descriptive writing. How does the load shift here?
Descriptive writing focuses on detailed presentations of people, places, or objects. Cognitively, this shifts the focus entirely.
How so?
You aren't organizing by chronological sequence anymore. You are organizing spatially, moving from left to right, from general to specific, from top to bottom.
Okay, yeah. And the language.
Linguistically, it is a fantastic way to push students to expand their lexical competence. They can't just use basic verbs. They have to use precise adjectives, sensory details, and prepositional phrases.
To paint a vivid picture in the reader's mind.
Exactly.
And the third type, argumentative writing. This has to be the hardest, right?
Without a doubt. Argumentative writing, expressing and defending opinions on topics or debates, is the most cognitively demanding task you can assign.
Walk me through exactly what is happening in a 15-year-old's brain when they have to write an argument in a foreign language.
Think about the executive functioning required here. They have to formulate a thesis. They have to select evidence.
Which is hard enough in your native language.
Right. But most importantly, they have to anticipate counter-arguments. They have to hold two opposing thoughts in their mind, acknowledge the opposition, and logically dismantle it.
All while using a foreign language. That is wild.
It is a massive cognitive load. Linguistically, this requires highly complex discourse competence to structure the logical flow.
And advanced grammar, too, I'd imagine.
Yes. Structures like conditionals. Like, if we were to implement this policy, the result would be, and they need highly abstract vocabulary.
Okay, so that is a huge hurdle for students. And beyond just individual tasks, the modern classroom heavily utilizes collaborative tools to support that load, right? The source highlights collaborative writing.
Yes, having students work together to produce a single text. This is brilliant pedagogically.
Why is that?
Because it makes the invisible cognitive process visible. When students collaborate, they have to verbally negotiate the planning stage.
They literally have to talk it out.
Exactly. They have to discuss language choices during drafting. They might say, should we use good or exemplary here?
They debate over revisions.
Yes. It turns the silent internal process of writing into an observable communicative act.
And obviously, digital technologies have supercharged this.
Oh, entirely.
Writing a blog, participating in an online forum, working simultaneously on a shared cloud document. These aren't just flashy tech tools to keep kids entertained, are they?
Not at all. They are authentic environments for the written interaction we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They provide real audiences.
Because a student writing a blog post knows that their peers will actually read it and comment on it.
Exactly. The permanence and the interaction are colliding in real time. It provides the ultimate meaningful context for communication.
All right, we are rounding the final corner of the exam essay.
The home stretch.
We've theorized it, we've analyzed the cognitive loops, we've designed the lesson plans, and the students have written their essays.
Now comes the grading.
Exactly. The natural follow-up, the final hurdle in your exam essay. So we've created this beautiful, messy, recursive classroom where students are collaborating and drafting.
Right.
But at the end of the term, the school district still demands a grade. How do you put a hard number on a recursive process?
It's tricky.
How do we assess written communication without just reverting to the old school method of circling grammar mistakes with a red pen until the paper bleeds?
Assessment is often where exam candidates lose points because they treat it as an afterthought.
They just write, I will give them a test at the end.
Right, which is not enough. You must be as rigorous in your explanation of assessment as you are with the theory. If your pedagogy is modern, your assessment cannot be archaic.
So what does the source say?
The source mandates a dual focus. Teachers must evaluate both form and content.
Because if it's just about the grammar, we are back to painting a wall.
Precisely. If communicative competence is the ultimate goal, you have to assess whether communication actually occurred.
Let's look at an extreme example.
Okay, if a student writes a deeply moving, logically brilliant, argumentative essay that actually convinces you to change your mind on a topic.
But they misplace 3 commas and misuse the subjunctive verb.
Right. Did they fail? No. They successfully communicated.
So how do we balance that?
The sources identify 4 pillars of grading that you must evaluate to balance form and content fairly.
Let's hit them.
Pillar 1, grammatical accuracy. Does the linguistic structure function correctly?
Basic code check.
Right. Pillar 2, vocabulary range. Is the lexis precise and varied, or is it overly repetitive?
Okay, pillar 3.
Pillar 3, organization and coherence. Is the text structured logically using cohesive devices?
And the final one.
Pillar 4, logical development of ideas. Did the content actually make sense and fulfill the communicative purpose?
Okay, so those are the 4 criteria, but what is the actual tool we use to measure them fairly across 35 different students?
Good question.
The text mentions various tools, but it zeroes in on one absolute gold standard.
The term you absolutely must highlight in your exam is analytical rubrics.
Let's explain why analytical rubrics are so vital, because a lot of people just think of them as a spreadsheet.
There are so much more than that.
If I hand a student a paper with a holistic grade like just a big red C or a 7 out of 10 at the top, what does that actually teach them?
It teaches them nothing about their process. It just tells them they aren't good enough. It's a purely summative judgment.
But an analytical rubric is different.
Very different. It breaks the assessment down into those 4 distinct pillars we just mentioned, with specific descriptors for different levels of achievement.
An analytical rubric isn't just a grading scale. It's a GPS for the student.
Oh, I love that comparison.
Think about it. If I just get a C, I'm lost. I don't know how to fix it for the next essay.
You're just wandering in the dark.
But if the rubric shows I scored a 9 out of 10 in vocabulary and grammatical accuracy, but I scored a 3 out of 10 in organization and coherence, the GPS is telling me exactly where I took a wrong turn.
Yes.
It tells me your language is beautiful, but your logic is a complete mess.
Exactly. It provides highly targeted, constructive feedback that feeds right back into the recursive writing process for the next assignment.
So you aren't just grading the finished clay sculpture, you're grading their technique on the wheel.
It shifts assessment from being a final punishment to being a formative teaching tool.
So as we bring this all together, when the listener is wrapping up their exam essay, what is the ultimate conclusion they need to draw?
You need a strong finish.
We've talked about syntax, we've talked about cognitive loops, we've talked about rubrics, but what is the overarching point of all this effort?
Your conclusion needs to synthesize the entire journey.
Give us the summary.
Fostering written communication in the foreign language classroom does far more than just build linguistic accuracy.
Right.
By teaching students to navigate the deliberate, recursive process of writing, you are actually developing their critical thinking.
You are forcing them to logically organize their view of the world.
Exactly. You are fostering their creativity. And you are equipping them with the vital academic and professional communication skills they need to participate actively in a globalized society.
You are giving them a voice that endures.
Beautifully said.
So when you walk into that exam hall, listener, remember the blueprint we've built today. I'm going to give you the ultra-short memory version, the absolute cheat code for your outline.
Write this down, folks.
Memorize this 9-step sequence. Step 1, introduction. You hook them with the CEFR and Hymes.
Step 2, the nature of the beast, permanence and planning.
Step 3, the components. Grammar, lexical, discourse, and cognitive.
Step 4, the process. You name-drop Flower and Hayes and their recursive loops.
Step 5, interaction. Bring the CEFR back in.
Step 6, teaching methods, the communicative and process approaches.
Step 7, activities. Break down narrative, descriptive, and argumentative tasks.
Step 8, assessment. Hit them with analytical rubrics.
And Step 9, conclusion. Wrap it all up. If you literally memorize that 9-step sequence, your exam answer will be perfectly structured.
If you connect those concepts logically, showing the why and the how behind each one, your essay won't just pass, it will be exemplary.
But before we sign off, I know you brought something special.
I did. I want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Lay it on us.
Something to consider as you prepare to actually step into the classroom of tomorrow, well beyond the confines of the exam syllabus.
I'm intrigued.
We have spent this entire deep dive discussing how written communication requires deliberate planning, rigorous revision, and structural formality.
Right.
We discuss how its absolute defining characteristic is permanence, isolated from time and space.
The ink on the page.
But think about your future students. Think about how they actually write every single day.
Oh, man. Mostly on their phones.
Exactly. They communicate primarily through instant, ephemeral digital bursts. Vanishing photos with captions, temporary texts, 24-hour stories, rapid-fire comment sections.
It's all so fast.
The permanence of writing is disappearing for them. Writing is becoming as fleeting and spontaneous as spoken jazz.
Wow.
So as a modern educator, how will you navigate that collision? How will the fact that the next generation's writing is increasingly temporary fundamentally shift the way we define the permanence and formality of written language itself?
That is a question that completely breaks the paradigm. If writing is no longer permanent, does it still require the same cognitive load?
It's a great question.
It's murky, it's fascinating, and grappling with those kinds of questions is exactly what will make you an incredible, adaptable teacher. Good luck on the exam. You've got the blueprint. Now go build the house.